Hello and welcome to episode 183 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay and me, Andy Leakes. Damien, welcome back. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, I'm good, Andy. I'm very good. It's been a busy week.
Been a busy week. It's been a hot week. How are you dealing with the heat, especially in your recording room? I know you record quite high up, so the heat rises.
The heat rises, yeah. So when we record, I have to have the windows closed because otherwise you'll pick up the planes flying into Heathrow. I'm nowhere near Heathrow, but if you've ever looked at one of those apps, the Plane Finder app, you can see they fly a set path and they come above my house. So you'd be listening to every Heathrow landing every couple of minutes. So it'll get worse when the new runway comes in that Boris Johnson has said he would have laid in front of a bulldozer for, but has disappeared from the country. But yeah, I'm good. I'm coping with the heat. I'm coping with the football, the World Cup, and probably by the time anybody listens to this podcast, we've been knocked out. So no, it's been good this week, and I'm just about to head off to the home of English football, actually. So almost as soon as I drop the mic on this podcast, I'm going to St George's Park, which is the home of English football in terms of training. They've got amazing facilities up there because my daughter, who's only 8, is playing in a tournament there. She's been picked with her, I think I mentioned it last week maybe on the podcast.
You did.
Has been picked with her team to play. So we're going there. We're going on a road trip. So I'm about to get stuck on the M25 for a few hours is what I'm saying. But all good apart from that. You, Andy? How's things?
Yeah, really good. Like you say, enjoying the heat. Actually, the thing is with this heat thing, I hear people talking about it. I see people posting about it on social media and stuff. But the reality is I work a day job in an office. And with air conditioning these days, really, you've got no idea what's going on outside, especially if you don't take a lunch break and you work silly hours like I have been this week. So everyone's telling me it's really hot. I haven't really experienced it. I feel like I should just go and have an ice cream and sit in the garden for a bit and try and experience some of this heat wave before it disappears.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean. We have a similar thing. I've been wearing shorts to work. I'm not boasting about that fact, but the traffic in Bromley has come to a standstill as a result. It's mental at the moment.
As a result of you wearing shorts?
Yeah, I think so. I'd like to think, but it might be because my office is opposite the tip, actually. So it's the people queuing up for that. Whenever there's hot weather, they do their gardening, and then they spend the next 2 days trying to get rid of the leftovers from their gardening. But so what are we talking about this week on the podcast, Andy? Shall I tell you?
Yes, please. I was just about to ask that very question.
3 pieces, actually. Now, one is inspired by an email from a listener called Andy. Good name. Mm-hmm. Good, strong name, Andy. And it's to do with profits. And it's a type of an investment that was very popular back in the, I would say, probably 80s, 90s. And there were lots of people had them, and they were normally sold alongside things like mortgages or etc. So it's a with profits investment, and there was lots of media coverage at one point about them and the negative side of them. And somebody has asked me, what do I think about them? So I'm going to talk about it. Diversification and rebalancing of investing and investment portfolios. Now, this is something I'm giving people an insight into research that I've done on 80/20 Investor, which is fascinating. I'm not biased. It's when I do these research pieces, I start with an idea in mind. I don't know where it's going to necessarily end up, and sometimes what falls out the other end is surprising, which is the best way research should be carried out. And it does mean sometimes you go around in circles, spend days doing something, and you come up with nothing. And the final one, which is going to interest a lot of people, is holidays. If you're going to go online and look for your holiday, you've been inspired by this warm weather and you want more. And it's about the cookies on your computer and the impact they have on the price you paid. Basically, we're being conned. So I'm going to talk to you about that and what to watch out for. Something that was picked up by one of the national newspapers.
Great. So what are we going to start with?
Right, let's start with, we'll go in the order that I named them. So with profits. Now, with profits investments, if you don't know, they are normally run by insurance companies. And they're a type of investment where your money is pooled into a fund, so up with other with profits investors, and what they do is the money's invested in shares, property, cash and bonds typically, and the cost of the insurance company business and the fund and everything is taken out of the money, and then there's a profit left at the end, and that's where the name comes from, with profits. So you want a strong insurance company to be running a with profits fund because you want them to be around for the long term. Now, the reason they work very differently from a normal investment fund. So if you had an investment fund, that we normally talk about. What happens is there's a manager that runs it. You might buy units in that fund, so put some money into the fund, and they manage that, and then your portion goes up and down in accordance with the overall amount in the fund. So what the manager achieves by investing in all these different things. Very simple. With profits have a different element. There are conventional with profits, which has you don't buy units, and there's a unitized version where you do buy units in the fund, just like you do in a normal unit trust. Doesn't really matter too much about the difference for people listening to this, but the idea of where with profits was meant to be exciting, or was meant to be different when it came about, was the idea of smoothing. Now, if you picture in your head a stock market going up and down, it's like a wiggly line, bobs up and down, and the return you get isn't smooth. It is erratic. It depends on what the manager invests in, and it depends on what those assets are actually doing. Now, with a with profits fund, you would put your money in, and then what they would do is they would attempt to smooth out those returns. So the money that is made and the profit that is made is pooled and it's retained. And what they will do each year is declare an annual bonus. So what they'll do is they'll say it's 3% or something like that. So that bonus goes on top of what you've invested. So your money is meant to grow. So the idea being that in years where the market might fall, you will still get a bonus because they might take it from the store of previous profits. That's the idea. So listen to that. People think this is great. That's a nice idea. It should work. And I'm therefore going to have smooth returns rather than this lumpy up and down. The other thing they will do is they can declare a terminal bonus. So at the end of the period in which you invest, because there's normally a term to your investment, and at the end of that term is the period which you can take your money out, they'll declare a terminal bonus. And it might be a big lump sum on top of what you've already put in. And that normally is what suddenly makes the investment look attractive. But you don't know what that terminal bonus is going to be until you get near the end. They might estimate it for you along the way and go, well, based on where we are currently, terminal bonuses would probably be something like this. But there's no guarantee. So it's like a carrot that's dangled at the end of the investment period where you could probably take your money out without penalty, but you might not get that. The annual bonuses, when they declare them, are permanent. Once you've declared them, they can't take them away. So you're given that portion of the accumulated profit. So it sounds quite a nice idea. So you're smoothing investments, you're getting something declared all along the way, you can see it grow, and at the end might get a nice Brucey bonus. But the reality is they've not performed well. So they're normally associated with pensions, they're sometimes associated with products that are alongside mortgages, or just straightforward investment bonds that have been sold by insurance companies. And there are some people who feel like they've been missold these types of investments. Now I'm going to explain why. The positive of with profits are that they smooth returns, and there are odd ones out there that have performed quite well. Now, let's get on to the negatives, and the list of negatives is far bigger than the list of positives.
I was going to say, is that it for the positives?
Yeah,
we're done, are we?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
That is it, right? Okay. So the theory of how they should work should be good. The reality...
So this isn't so much pros and cons, it's pro and cons.
It is kind of, to be honest with you. And now, I remember going back when I was working in financial services industry and looking at people, they'd come and they'd have one of these products they were sold 10, 15 years ago, more than that even, and we'd look at them, and we'd look at the return that they've achieved, and the return is poor on most of them. And the FCA looked into them, and they did a review of them, and there's been other reviews into with profits funds generally. The big problem is you don't know how much you're going to get. There's an unknown return element to it, and there's a very opaque charging, because the charging comes out of the whole pot, so you don't see how much you're getting charged a year, and so therefore the amount of money you get back takes into account the charges in a lot of cases, and therefore you don't know what you're going to get in terms of returns from year to year. So those bonuses can vary. You can look at the history of the bonuses, but they haven't managed to smooth them quite often as much as you would like. So you'd sit there and think, well, actually, I would have been better off if I take into account where the market's gone, just staying in the market, investing in the market and taking all the rough and the smooth rather than just getting these declared bonuses every year. Now, to give you an idea, they looked at the returns on a given year from a with profits fund, and they varied massively from just 2.8% up to 16.5%. That's a huge range. Bearing in mind these guys are meant to be doing a similar job. But it's not just return of the overall fund. The return on the equity component, so that's normally the component of a fund that's going to give you the most upside. For some of those funds, the research has shown that some funds' equity component only returned 4.4% in a given year, and others returned 25%. So that shows you that these managers are running these funds, but when they're running the equity portion that's meant to try and give you a bit more of the upside, they're very bad at it. And what's happened is a lot of negative publicity came from with profits funds through something called the MVA, which is the market value adjustment. And there will be people who may look at their with profits paperwork and go, well, what is that? And what they've done is they realised that their with profits funds aren't performing as they should. So to stop people pulling all their money out and impacting the people who are left behind, they do a market value adjustment, which is basically a penalty. It's an exit fee, which they apply as and when they want to. And therefore, when the market's doing badly, all these with profit funds had MVAs and they locked people in. Some of them were huge. So you couldn't take your money out and then go and invest in something else that would probably do far better. And it took years for those MVAs to be removed. And in some cases, there probably are some people out there, they haven't been. So what's happened is this smoothing effect didn't work in a lot of cases. They also then had penalties they didn't realise they would have that locked them in. So they're locked into these poor performing funds. But more importantly, what happened is that where they were doing so badly and these funds were being closed to new business, the insurance companies have started, in a lot of cases, just matching their liability. So what they've got to pay out to people to try and give them some of the guarantees that were under these with profits funds. So what it meant is they looked at it and went, well, we've got to just try and just give them a couple of % a year. That's all we need to do, just so we don't get into any more trouble. So they've therefore gone for safer and safer and safer types of investments, which means that a lot of these with profits funds are now predominantly invested in bonds and gilts and sometimes cash. Well, you're never going to make a lot of money in those instances from those types of investments. And also in a market where bonds are starting to not do so well, you can see that those funds are going to do even worse. So what's ended up happening is some people have found themselves almost locked into investments that are performing more badly going forward because actually the insurance company's given up the ghost on them. They've got loads of money in there, but they're thinking, look, all we've got to do is just match the liability that we've got to pay out on these people. If we don't hit the guarantees we've maybe offered on some of these, that's going to be a real problem. So let's just do that, which is barely anything. And so therefore people have found themselves in just quasi-bond funds, which isn't what they wanted, and it certainly wasn't what they set out to achieve. And therefore when you look at will these funds or will these with profits funds suddenly pick up the pace and will future annual bonuses be good? The chances are for a lot of them they won't, because they're going to be just investing in bonds. So they're never going to declare some fantastic bonuses or indeed terminal bonuses. So my view overall, which was the question on with profits funds, is you have to review them. So it's a bit like the World Cup. You need to get the VAR out and look at them and sit there and go, well, what's going on with this fund? And unless you've got a very financially sound insurer behind your with profits fund, and unless it's open, i.e. it's a fund they're still accepting new business into, the chances are your with profits fund has been massively underperforming, and so therefore you need to get it reviewed. And that may mean going to speak to a financial advisor who can look at it objectively versus all the others in the market and sit there and advise you what to do, because it can come down to if your with profits fund has an MVA on it, you may end up deciding, do you know what, I'd rather take the hit than leave it languishing in a poor fund, because any of those negative adjustments that are penalties are on there are normally removed when you get to a particular date, which is like the fund's stipulated maturity date, which actually tends to be for a lot of people near their retirement date. So it may be there is a period where that, by the rules of the fund itself, that the penalties are removed, but you have to make sure you know when that is, because what happens when that date passes, your window may have disappeared and then those penalties, those MVAs, reappear on your policy again. So if you have a with profits fund, the message of this part is get the paperwork out, look at it, engage with it, and then go and get someone to review it for you, because it could be you could do better elsewhere and you may be able to get out of it without any penalties. But there are some with profits funds that aren't doing too badly. As a personal view, I would never invest in one myself because I'd rather have some element of control and would rather ride the ups and downs of the stock market rather than trying to buy a product that is going to potentially smooth, which is what they try and say it will do. But ultimately, that smoothing you have a lack of control over and it may hit your returns. Before we move on, Andy, I just wanted to quickly mention 80/20 Investor. Now, 80/20 Investor is my DIY investment service. Do go and check it out. I empower and teach people how to invest their own money. The service provides data-driven fund tables. The data is driven by my own unique 80/20 Investor algorithm, which I created. You also get stop-loss alerts, you get research articles and insight, you get market commentaries, monthly commentaries, and DIY investment lessons, but you also get access to my £50,000 portfolio, which is a portfolio of my own money, which I run live on the site for members to see, and it shows people how I use the service to maximise my returns. And in the first 2 years of doing so, I turned £50,000 into £59,500, which is a 19% return, beating investment managers, professional fund managers, financial advisors, investment banks, passive trackers and the market. So everybody can have a free 30-day trial of 80/20 Investor, and you can claim that by going to moneytothemasses.com and going and clicking on the 80/20 Investor hyperlink at the top of the page. So go and try the service. Let me know what you think of it, and I know from the feedback that you're going to love it. But for now, on with the show.
Okay, Damien, the sun is shining and it's getting a lot of people thinking, what am I going to do for my holiday this summer? People are booking holidays left, right and centre. And funnily enough, you mention it, I've been looking over the past few days at getting away in the next couple of months. So what's all this about cookies and people diddling us?
Cookies, diddling us and holidays. I know we said we'd do the pieces in order, but me and Andy have just decided to veer off because we want to talk about holidays. And the idea is that whenever you look anywhere on the internet, you've got a browser history and you have cookies. You know?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Hang on a minute. I wish someone had told me that.
Well, we're talking about looking at the clean things in life. The cookies aren't that big a problem because they save down some of the preferences you've set on websites, and it can improve some of your browsing experience, but they can be used against you. And what's happened, it came to light many years ago. I remember some airlines were accused of using your cookie history to effectively charge you more. And now the Times have done a piece that it's a bit of investigative journalism, I suppose you could say, but it's the underlying issue has always been there. But what they've shown very well is that if you start searching for a holiday, then certain companies are clearly, it would appear, using your cookie history, the fact that you've already gone on and searched for certain holidays, to when you go back to use that against you and charge you more in a kind of supply and demand way of doing things. So they're knowing you're interested, so what they do is they start putting the price up because they can see that you've already looked at this. So therefore, yeah, do you know what, Mr. Leeks is keen on this holiday, he's keen on going to wherever it is, and so we're going to just start notching up the price. Or they don't show you the best deal because of your cookies and browser history. Now they have accused Expedia, is it Apodo? I suppose you say that, and Virgin were three of the companies they've accused of doing it. And they went through and looked at some holidays, and they did one on Apodo where they said you go to San Francisco for a 2-week holiday would cost £1,215 per person. But if you cleared your cookie history and looked at the same price, you would, or the same holiday, I should say, the price would be £84 per person cheaper. So that's quite a saving. I mean, it's not going to blow the doors off, but the fact is, it shows that they are starting to use your cookie history to give you a different price. Now, they did this and they experimented by using two computers, one where they allowed it to store cookies and the other where they didn't. And that's how they started to notice the price differences. They, like I said, they noticed it on Expedia as well, and there's others they've tried to accuse of doing it. Now, all the companies have said they don't, but it does raise the question: is why are the prices different if they're not? And I know in years gone by, certain airlines have been accused of it. EasyJet were once accused of it, and again they denied it. So the purpose of this piece, as an FYI, is to say to people, if you're looking for a holiday, then be aware that your cookies could be used against you. So how do you stop that? Well, go and clear your cookies. And you can do that by going on whatever web browser you use. If you go up and look at the browser history, there'll be settings you can clear your history or your cookies. Of course, if you do that, it's probably going to clear all your passwords and things like that. But you may not be that bothered. You could use two computers. So you could use one that is storing cookies and one that isn't, and see if you're getting the best deal. Because as much as they said that the clearing the cookies would help you, there were instances which they had to admit to, whereby clearing your cookies, actually, you got charged more. So it isn't a perfect solution. It does sometimes see that the cookie storage could help you, but the findings were generally that the cookies were being used against you. And the final thing you could do is go incognito. Now, a lot of browsers, they have a incognito mode, which is you can browse and it doesn't store what you were looking at. It doesn't store your cookies. I mean, it does mean it's not you browse and no one can find out. Your ISP can still find out. Do you know what I mean? Your internet provider knows what you're looking at, but you're not storing cookies, and that would seem to also help you perhaps skirt around this issue of them storing cookies. So there you go. Watch your cookies, Andy.
Okay, so diversification and rebalancing. What have we got here?
This is an investment piece that's inspired by research that I've carried out on 80/20. Some of it this week, another part of this I'd done research previously. Now, if you build a portfolio, you want to diversify. Now, the purposes of diversifying are that you don't put all your eggs in one basket. So you end up having funds that invest in different assets, be it equities, bonds, properties, whatever. But also within those assets, you diversify by having different types of fund that invest in maybe large companies in the UK or smaller companies in the UK. But you also may even go down the road of, within each of those categories, you might decide to hold more than one fund, so that more than one fund that invests in large companies in the UK. Because, of course, while a fund manager holds lots of different assets in their fund, you are sort of subject to the fund manager doing well. And if the fund manager doesn't, in the circumstance of Neil Woodford, unfortunately, recently, then people who gave him all their money are sitting there looking or wishing they hadn't. That inevitably will change at some point. Every manager has his day. So diversifying is a good thing. And you may sit there and work out how you want to invest. But one of the questions that people ask me is, how many funds do you have in a particular sector? And there is a danger you can over-diversify within a sector. Now, there will be people out there who will have a portfolio and they'll have like 30, 40 funds in. And financial advisors are guilty of this. But I think that gets to a point where you over-diversify because you want an element of conviction in what you do. So if you're going to invest in UK equities, a portion of your portfolio, having about 6, 7, 8 different fund managers within that sector, you're starting to dilute the conviction of any one. And that's great, but what you'll start to do is you'll start to head towards the market average. Just think about it. If you held all the managers in that sector, I like to think in extremes. It helps you understand things. You'll start going towards the market average by having less of them from a particular sector. So you're starting having a bit of conviction. That means that you've got more chance of outperforming. It does mean, of course, that you've got more chance of underperforming. But one of the things I want to sort of share with people is I once did some research into this, looking at how many funds is the optimum if you're going to hold funds within the same sector. And actually what happens, a lot of funds just start to follow the crowd. And you can see that there's something called correlation coefficients, which just measure how things move in relation to each other. And if you get a correlation coefficient of 1, that means they move in lockstep. So one goes up, another one follows. And you can see that a lot of funds have a correlation coefficient of 0.99. That's call it 1, yeah?
Yeah.
That with what the rest of the herd are doing, so their peers are doing, they follow. And it's because managers don't want to get the sack. That's what it is. If you underperform your benchmark or your peers, then you're likely to get the sack. If you just follow the crowd, you're not going to. So the good manager will stick their head above the parapet every now and then, but it does mean they're prone to underperforming. Woodford is an example. He's underperforming now because he's got a conviction, but there'll be a point where he does outperform. So it does mean that if a lot of managers are copying each other, why hold them? And how many should you hold? And the research showed that between 3 to 5 was the maximum. That was kind of the sweet spot. But if you're going to hold a number of managers from the same sector, as soon as you're starting to get above that, it's actually a waste of time because you're just basically buying more of the same. If you buy funds in the same sector, you want them to be doing different things. And if you hold more than 3, chances are you're starting to get to the point where you're holding funds that do the same. So I'm much more conviction-led. I will probably only ever hold 1 or 2. And that will tend to give you greater chance of outperforming. But once you've picked your portfolio and you've decided your asset mix and whatever have you, there comes a question of how often you rebalance. And rebalancing may mean that you look at, you've got 20% in UK equities, then over time, it's a bit like your garden. If you don't tend to it, it'll start to go a bit wild and it'll start to grow and do its own thing. And so your portion of your portfolio that starts to outperform will start to become a bigger and bigger part of your portfolio because the bit that underperforms starts to shrink. So is that a problem? And should you rebalance? And I get asked it quite often, how often you should rebalance. So I did a load of research this week into it because there is no real definitive answer I've seen out there about how should you rebalance, what are the impacts, and how often should you do it. Now, if you start off with an equally weighted portfolio, so you end up having, say, UK equities, US equities, bonds, global bonds, blah, 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 and you have the same amount in each. If you let your portfolio go wild, you're going to basically end up doing a form of momentum investing. So you're going to end up outperforming than if you do rebalance. And that almost seems universal, that rebalancing doesn't boost your returns. What it does is it boosts your risk return profile. So you start taking less risk, because if you did that, say, 20 years ago and just let your garden grow wild, what you'd find is you'd be invested almost predominantly in Chinese equities right now. And I know that because I ran the numbers. So that is very different to where you'd want to be when you started off with only like 5% in each category. You'd end up being predominantly, hugely so, in some of the emerging market stuff. Well, of course, that makes you prone to a market sell-off. And by rebalancing, you end up reining things back in and you start managing the risks. That's a good thing. But there isn't actually a direct relationship between how frequently you rebalance and the impact on that risk. So you think, oh, if I rebalance more frequently, then I bring the risk profile down and the returns. You've got to let your garden grow wild a bit, is what I'm getting at. But you've got to sort of do a bit of weeding every now and then. And that's what is shown by the research that I carried out. So if you rebalance monthly, it doesn't actually necessarily mean that your returns get a big hit compared to if you let it go wild, because that's kind of momentum versus you keeping things in check. But the benefits of doing so, it's a bit of a law of diminishing returns from a risk perspective, risk return. So you're not actually improving things too much. So the message is, if you're worried about risk, absolutely rebalance, but don't do it too frequently. Monthly is too much. If you do it too much, you actually start impacting not only the return, but you actually stop getting any benefit from the risk profile in the sort of improving risk. You actually start in some ways starting to slightly increase risk again, because you're starting to make changes that occur on days where the market might suddenly rally or whatever have you. So you actually start impacting it. But I'm not going to give away this part of the research because obviously it's for 80-20 investors, they pay for it. But one of the surprising things that came out of it is if, like most people, you have a portfolio the way you start your starting point. So rebalance is always looking back at your starting point. If that starting point has a level of conviction in it whereby you may, for example, have 30% in UK equities and you may only have, 4% in China. So you're starting to skew it. Now, rebalancing has a big impact on that. And the impact, again, generally is that rebalancing improves the risk to return profile and it impacts the return you're going to get. But I'm not going to give it away, but there was a period, if you started to rebalance at a certain frequency, it actually improved the returns, which is a massive surprise. So you'd think that keep reining it back to where you started. Now, it can actually boost your returns, but it was only on a particular frequency of rebalancing. So if you did it at a set period of time. And thinking of that more broadly, why that could be is it actually depends on what your original starting point was, of course. So if your conviction with a certain type of, say, equity actually performed over the long term, because this research I carried out went back about 25 years. So it followed what happened over 25 years. So that's what I base it on. And it obviously depends on the original asset mix that you had. But I suppose the point of this, the summary of this piece is diversifying is good. Don't over diversify, because if you do, you just start getting the market, in which case you might as well just buy a tracker. Keep the number of funds you have. The research has shown the number of funds per sector, no more than really 3. I would normally go less, because then you're starting to get a bit of conviction. It means you can outperform but underperform. But rebalancing is good. I don't do it because I review my portfolio regularly and look at the funds that are in there. So you're kind of doing that. But if you're going to have a set strategy you want to stick to for a long term, then you're going to have to probably decide whether to rebalance. And if you rebalance, you've got to realise that if you do it too frequently, you hit returns and the risk return profile. You start actually hampering the portfolio overall. So you don't want to weed too often. What you want to do is do it frequently enough so you're actually improving the risk profile. So don't do it monthly, do it less frequently than that, perhaps every year. But there is a point where if you have conviction with your initial allocation, rebalancing can start to improve it. Because if you imagine you have a garden with a really big bush in it and you don't weed it, that bush is going to go mental and it's going to kill everything else off. It's kind of got that element to it. So there you go. It's a bit of a sneak preview, a bit of research. If you want to know the full piece of research, what was the optimum time to rebalance if you want to stick to your original asset mix? I don't. I vary my asset mix a lot. So what I have now with my 50k portfolio is nothing like the asset mix I had at the start 3 years ago. But if you are going to stick to a particular mix that you like, then the research shows you the optimum period to rebalance.
Excellent stuff. I do love the way you always come back to a garden analogy. The quantitative easing, I always remember being the watering the garden analogy, and now you're telling people to regularly weed their garden. So I love
Trim their bushes, that's what we're talking about.
Good stuff.
On that, we're talking about, a change slightly, podcast reviews, right, Andy? We are getting some. We're still getting them. If you listen to this and you're not giving us a review, do so. And you could take one leaf out of Johnny to Then, who left a review this week. He said, learning at a greater rate. I've stumbled on this podcast and have learned more about finance in 3 episodes than I have for years on my own Steam. So learn from Johnny's leaf from his book. But on the other hand, don't leave a 4-star rating, which Johnny did after giving such a cracking written review. He gave us 4 stars out of 5. I appreciate the review, Johnny, and anyone else out there who leaves reviews. I mean, Johnny, you can change that if you like. I'm not going to coerce you, but you can put it to 5. But some people are difficult to please, Andy. But give us a review and we will read it out.
Yeah, and more for you if you leave less than 5 by the sounds of it. So yes, do get in touch. If you want to get in touch with Damien, you can, of course, in the usual ways. On Twitter, it's at moneytothemasses with a number 2, or you can contact Damien at damien@moneytothemasses.com. Good.
Yeah.
We all done?
We are done, Andy. I've got to get in the car and drive to, I suppose, the Midlands. I would say the North, but there are probably people who listen to this podcast who think that anything below Manchester is the South.
Sorry, I keep thinking, yeah, you said the home of football earlier, so in my mind you're going to Wembley. No, but of course you're going to St George's Park, aren't you? That's right. Do you know whereabouts it is? Like what specific county? Or
You would think I would, bearing in mind I'm about to get in the car, wouldn't you, Andy? But I don't. And I'd have to look it up, and I'm not going to. It's a surprise. I just know when I looked a few weeks ago, it's going to take me about 3 hours driving. But I like driving. So until next week.
Until next week.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Play. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.
Well, you enjoy your sit in the car in the traffic, in your short stop in the traffic, and we'll see everyone next week. No, we won't. We'll hear from... No, we won't even hear from them. We'll hear from you. They'll hear from you. Damien, I'll do that a bit again. Good. Well, you enjoy your trip up north or wherever it is. We still haven't established. I'm sure people are going to be screaming at their podcast right now. And we'll see everyone next week. No, we still won't see them. Right.
We'll leave that one in, Andy, because Andy's done that 3 times and he keeps saying it.